Mel just said, I'm David Allen. I'm the wine director at Wine Searcher. I've been asked to share some data we compiled for New Zealand wine growers, showing how we see the position of New Zealand's Sauvignon Blanc wines around the world. First, let's establish the extent and scope of the data used. I hope most of you are familiar with Wine Searcher, either through our website or via our app, and understand our role as the search engine globally for wines. To quantify this, we currently have over 10 million wine offers on our database, comprising over 500,000 individually identifiable wines, with 4.7 million users, roughly, accessing the website every month, showing prices for over 20,000 merchants and auction houses across 114 countries. I'm going to examine wine availability through numbers of online offers we see, the number of listings. This, of course, doesn't account for the varying sales volumes of each listing. I'll then contrast this with search trends coming from users in a few key markets. The data came principally from 2018. Since Mature Valley's first commercial release in 1974, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc exports have been an enormous success. To put this into a global perspective, we reviewed the completed user searches for last year. There were 176 million of them, noting the variety of the wine in each search and applying our varietal classifications to them. I should explain what I mean by a search and how this relates to grape varieties. I don't just mean people typing Sauvignon Blanc into the search box on our website. It could also include people scanning things with their camera phone. I'm including any search that found a result for a wine made from Sauvignon Blanc. So a search for Didier Dagenou's Silex Pouilly-Fumé counts the same as one for Grey Wacky Sauvignon Blanc, as each returned a result for a wine made from Sauvignon Blanc. We're only comparing varietal wines here, so Margaret River Sauvignon Semillons and blends from the Graves aren't included. Sauvignon Blanc ranked 14th in our list of varieties, with around 3 million searches, which is about 1.5% of the total. First came Bordeaux Blends, which got 36 million searches, 20% of the total. Then Pinot Noir, including Red Burgundy, of course, 26 million searches, 13%. Next, Chardonnay, including White Burgundy, naturally, followed by Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah and Shiraz, Champagne blends, then Nebbiolo and Sangiovese. In fact, we have Southern Rhone red blends, Merlot, the obscure category rare red blends, and even Riesling, ahead of the pale green section here, which represents Sauvignon Blanc. This rather puts this massive trend into perspective. Sauvignon Blanc is a niche. This result also indicates limitations in the nature of wine searchers' data. Our users clearly disproportionately search for high-end wines from Bordeaux and Burgundy over fresh, fruity whites. A large proportion of Sauvignon Blanc sells through multiple grocers, where we lack comprehensive coverage. All the same, we should be able to derive some useful information from examining 3 million searches. So how big a portion of the Sauvignon Blanc niche does New Zealand own? Surely New Zealand dominates this variety. We looked at all the searches we saw for New Zealand wines last year and calculated what percentage of the total global searches for each variety they represented. Here are some of the results. So you've got Merlot, 1%. Chardonnay, 1%. Syrah and Shiraz, 2%. Riesling, 2%. These are what you'd expect from a country that produces 1 to 2% of the world's wine. Pinot Noir came in at 3%. Pinot Gris came in at 17%. Now, this is because we separate out Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio in our database, so that's a slightly artificial result. Sauvignon Blanc was 30%. But hold on, Sauvignon Blanc is only the third most dominant variety in search terms. What other varieties does New Zealand have with a bigger stranglehold over searches? Last year, New Zealand wines returned 56% of all the global searches for Wurza. And a wine from Ripon received all the world's searches for a wine made from Osteiner. Nick Mills has truly cornered this market. Unfortunately, Osteiner is about as rare as Unicorn excretia. And the point is, Wurza and Osteiner together received less than 1,000 searches. Sauvignon's a niche with 3 million, where we saw 3 million searches last year. Here we've got a slide broken down by the offers we collect for New Zealand wines by country. So all New Zealand wines, not just Sauvignon. I should say there are biases in our listing data too, so it shouldn't simply be taken at face value. Our penetration of each market varies according to several factors, language being a prominent one. Our site is primarily in English, so these results tend to underplay non-Anglophone markets. In some markets, listing numbers are artificially influenced. Sweden's retail monopoly, for example, restricts the number of listings. At Wine Searcher, the export markets we collect the most New Zealand wine offers from are the USA, UK, Australia, Germany, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, the Netherlands, Canada, and Ireland. To save time, I'm going to concentrate on a few of these, and I'm afraid I won't discuss the domestic market. Here we see New Zealand's share of offers in each of those 10 markets. New Zealand's share of the market is generally stable or, in some cases, declining. Most notable declines being Australia at the top there, Singapore in the grey, down through there, the UK in red pretty much following the grey of Singapore. This may not be a problem, as in mature markets, sales volumes per brand could have increased to outweigh this. However, these markets are clearly getting more difficult. Ireland, in the pale blue there, is the only market where listings seem to be showing significant growth. So that's growth in numbers of listings. Here's the varietal split of New Zealand wines offered in the US. I'm going to look at the US quickly. Sauvignon Blanc comprising 68% of all New Zealand wine offers in this market. Remember, this is the number of wine offers and not the volume of sales. We can't see that. Thus, Sauvignon Blanc selling in larger volumes will probably account for more than the 70% of sales, and Riesling, which will probably account for less than the 0.8% shown here in terms of sales. I'll change colour now to differentiate the pie charts by state from the national picture I've just shown you. Sauvignon Blanc in deep purple. This is New York. It's a large, mature market and closely follows the average you see for the US. California is presumably different because they produce their own Sauvignon Blanc. New Jersey, similar to New York but heavier on Sauvignon. Florida, very similar picture to New York. I put in Connecticut because they're very heavy on Sauvignon listings, and I suspect this is an immature and growing market. New Zealand's growing the size of its niche throughout the US. Within every US state we looked at, New Zealand was increasing its share of total Sauvignon Blanc listings. Note New York in grey at the top there, still just about growing. So the market established there. California in yellow at the bottom. And Texas, the darkest line and rising fastest. Here we see the total demand for all Sauvignon Blanc, regardless of country of origin, as defined by successful searches from the US over 12 months. This is depicted by state, the relative height of the columns, representing the volume of searches. California easily outstrips New York, New Jersey, and Florida. Demand is relatively small in states like Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Montana, and North and South Dakota, and that reflects their smaller populations. Here, we're juxtaposing the number of searches for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc by month, so number of searches in blue there, and the scale down there, with the share of searches for all Sauvignon Blanc, so the share of the market in the same graph, which is the pale blue line, and the percentages to the right there. This graph is for the whole US, so let's look at the states. Earlier on, we saw New York offers for New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs at 24 to 25% of all Sauvignon offers for this period. So searches are just about 24%, is just marginally behind that. California's offers increased to about 19%. California's offers on the previous slide increased to 19%, but they constitute just over 20% of searches there. In New Jersey, New Zealand Sauvignon offers have grown to 24% of the total, but are nearly 30% of searches for the variety. Florida offers grew to 25% of the market, but they're still catching up with searches at 29% there. In the US, offers are growing, search numbers are growing slightly, but the proportion this makes up of total Sauvignon searches is actually falling, suggesting a growing market and increasing competition. Finally, for the US, here's the competition, breaking up demand for Sauvignon Blanc by state into country of origin, showing the major players, France, the US, and New Zealand. Chile, the next on the list, is pretty insignificant, so we've missed them off. New Zealand is purple, the US orange, and France blue. The size of each pie relates to the relative volume of searches from each state. Demand for US wines dominates in California, obviously, and the West Coast, also in Wyoming, Utah, and Oklahoma. On the East Coast, actually, Delaware stands out for its loyalty to domestic wines. Demand for French wine is strongest from New York and the eastern seaboard. New Zealand is strong in the southern states, Texas, Florida, North and South Carolina, but also in states like New Jersey, Colorado, and Pennsylvania. In the UK, Pinot Noir in orange here is almost as important as Sauvignon Blanc, the pale green, with just 1 percentage point difference, perhaps showing the UK is a more mature market for New Zealand wines. The 3,552 New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc offers in the UK make up 30.1% of the Sauvignon market currently tracked by Wine Searcher there. This is a larger share of all the Sauvignon Blanc offers in the market than we saw in any of the US states. With only 140 fewer offers, Pinot Noir accounts for just 6% of offers for that variety. And so the size of pie, I'm trying to represent the proportion of each market for each variety there. Here we see the total number of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc searches from UK users. Again, the dark blue with the scale to the left, and that's been overlaid with the proportion of searches for Sauvignon Blanc, with which New Zealand accounts for in this market, on the right with the pale there. Search numbers vary noticeably by month, but show clear Christmas peaks. It's over 2 years, so. New Zealand's proportion of total Sauvignon searches is falling slightly to about 39%. But that's above the 30% that it comprised of listings on the previous slide. Listing numbers don't account for sales volumes, but the 9 percentage point gap between listings and searches indicates potential in this market. In Australia, there are more offers for Pinot Noir than Sauvignon Blanc, again indicating a mature market of wines. Also note, Pinot Gris is the third most popular listed wine in this market, ahead of Chardonnay there. There are 2,499 offers for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc in Australia. These comprise 35.7% of all Sauvignon Blanc offers currently tracked in this market, so the offers and the proportion there. Searches from Australian IP addresses for New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs show clear Christmas peaks again. New Zealand's proportion of all Sauvignon searches has declined slightly to 58%, but remains well ahead of the 36% of Sauvignon Blanc offers seen on the previous slide. Looking quickly at a few more European markets, Germany appears to love New Zealand Sauvignon, with it making up about 45% of New Zealand listings. Wine Searcher has 1,033 Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc offers in the German market. However, these wines comprise just 10.5% of the Sauvignon market offered in Germany. In Ireland, Sauvignon Blanc is not far behind the position in Germany, comprising about 43% of New Zealand's listings. But then we see the Irish to be real lovers of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, as it makes up 31.4% of all Sauvignon Blanc listings there. I love it that Grunefeldwine is a category in Ireland. Sweden's market, with its monopoly, is slightly different, with Sauvignon Blanc just short of 33% of New Zealand's listings, and about 20% of all offers for this variety in Sweden. In most of these European markets, the level of user searches for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc makes up a higher proportion of Sauvignon searches than the corresponding offer numbers suggest they should. In Germany, New Zealand wines are 10.5% of all offers, but comprise 20%, nearly 20% of all searches. In Ireland, they're 31% of offers, but push the right button, but 40% of searches. It's only in Sweden's controlled market that offers and searches are almost in balance, with 20% of all Sauvignon Blanc listings just marginally ahead of the 19% of searches that you saw there. Sorry, I'll try and sort this out. How does New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc fare in Hong Kong and China, where consumers favour classic red wines? They seem to be doing pretty well. In both markets, there are more listings for New Zealand Pinot than Sauvignon Blanc, but only by 3 to 5 percentage points. In Hong Kong, New Zealand wines make up 32% of all offers for Sauvignon Blanc. And in mainland China, the varietal split for New Zealand wines is much as it is in Hong Kong, with New Zealand Sauvignon comprising 28.5%, I've got the wrong figure there, of all Sauvignon offers. Sorry, I'll go back to that. So I get that. Yeah, sorry. Try that again, shall I? I completely lost myself here, I do apologise. So 30% there of offers, 28% here of offers, China 32, and 45% there on Hong Kong, 35% there. So contrastingly, sorry, I've mucked that up completely, but basically you're seeing more searches than offers as a proportion of the total Sauvignon market. Sorry about that. The outlook appears more encouraging than the declining share of listings in several key markets initially suggested. There's strong growth in listing numbers across the important US market. Some states growing faster, while more mature markets may be slowing. The number of US searches for Sauvignon Blanc appears stable. However, the percentage of these searches that New Zealand wines comprise fell slightly, possibly indicating increasing competition there. Searches for New Zealand Sauvignons remain ahead of the percentage they make up of offers, so demand still seems to be outstripping listings. In the UK and Australian markets, Pinot Noir's virtual parity in listing numbers shows these markets' maturity. But even in the difficult UK market, New Zealand Sauvignon made up a higher proportion of Sauvignon searches than listings. This was even more marked in Australia, with searches at 12.4 percentage points ahead of listings. Consumers in these markets are conversant with New Zealand Sauvignon, and that suggests to me that it's lost its novelty. It's now a market driver. In those European markets considered, Germany was stable, Ireland exciting, and only Sweden saw New Zealand's percentage of searches for the variety lag behind, and then only marginally the percentage of listings. Sweden's controlled market makes it no surprise that the two were closely aligned there. Finally, in the Far East, New Zealand has built a firm presence in the limited Sauvignon Blanc sector. Assuming these markets will grow, New Zealand wines appear poised to capitalise on this position. Thank you for listening. Sorry I've rabbited through so quickly, and I hope that's useful.